Welcome to the Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. So, if you're a carbon project developer, you already know that keeping up with methodology updates can sometimes feel, well, like trying to hit a moving target. But today, we're going to fix that. Our goal in this Explainer is to completely demystify the highly technical updates within Verra's VM0047 version 1.1. We're going to break down these new rules, cut right through the jargon, and build a really clear, actionable roadmap for your next high-integrity carbon project, especially if you're diving into agroforestry. All right, let's just jump right in.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at the VM0047 timeline, the area versus census approaches, measuring pre-existing biomass, tracking and buffers, emissions and exclusions, and finally, those crucial agroforestry guidelines. Let's go. All right, part 1, the VM0047 timeline. So V1.1 officially dropped back in May 2024. But if you're currently transitioning from version 1.0, Verra is actually offering some really generous grace periods. You've got until December 31st, 2025 to request your pipeline listing under V1.0, and then until December 31st, 2026 for registration. So these extended deadlines give you some much-needed breathing room to validate those projects you've already spent so much time planning. But hey, if you're starting fresh right now, version 1.1 is absolutely your new standard. Moving right along to part 2, area versus census approaches. Think of this as the methodology's sorting hat. It really is the fundamental fork in the road for any new project. These two paths are mutually exclusive, and they're defined entirely by the scale and the expected impact of your intervention. On one side, we have the area-based approach, which evaluates performance across your entire project area using a remote sensing-driven dynamic performance benchmark. On the flip side, the census-based approach tracks individual planted trees, and this is specifically for projects where you don't really expect a broad land use change, from non-forest to forest. This choice is absolutely crucial, especially for agroforestry developers trying to seamlessly blend agriculture with natural regeneration.
Now, the magic number in version 1.1 is 50. In the older version, there was this kind of confusing 1 hectare limit, but thankfully, that's completely gone. Massive update. Now the rule is simple. If you plant 50 or fewer trees per hectare on average, you qualify for the census-based approach, no matter how big your total project area is. Plant 51? Boom, you immediately trigger the area-based approach. It honestly takes so much ambiguity right out of the planning phase.
Okay, part 3, measuring pre-existing biomass.
This right here was a massive headache for developers under version 1.0. Establishing time zero or T0 without physical plots. I mean, how are you supposed to account for what was already on the land before you even started, especially if the site was totally cleared before you could collect data? Well, fortunately, version 1.1 officially embraces remote sensing to solve this exact puzzle. Now, remote sensing is obviously extremely convenient, but Verra demands a pretty strict trade-off to keep integrity high and prevent overcrediting. You can only use it for above and below ground woody biomass. That means soil organic carbon and deadwood, strictly excluded. And here is the real kicker. You have to use the upper 90% confidence bound of your model's estimate. Basically, you're deliberately taking a conservative hit to your carbon baseline by assuming there was more biomass originally present. Plus, your model absolutely must be peer-reviewed and exactly match the spatial resolution of your stocking index.
But, what if you actually prefer having boots on the ground? Well, if you're out there doing physical site visits and plot measurements, version 1.1 clarifies that your plot data remains valid for exactly 2 years prior to any site prep or clearing. So that gives you a nice, clean 24-month window to get your baseline measurements locked down before the tractors roll in.
Part 4, tracking and buffers.
If you're going with the census-based approach, the tracking rules are simple, but man, they are incredibly unforgiving. You can use GPS, physical markers, or a mix of both. But if you're relying on GPS, its positional accuracy literally must be less than the spacing between your trees. Why? Because every single tree has to be uniquely identifiable. If an auditor goes out to your field and can't locate a tree, that tree is assumed dead and it's excluded from your census. 0 exceptions. Trust me, you do not want to play hide and seek with an auditor. Your tracking data has got to be totally flawless.
And to prevent any double counting during your project design, you're required to maintain a strict 10-meter buffer between different tree instances. Now, you can pack trees pretty tightly inside a single instance, as long as you can uniquely identify them, but separate, distinct instances, they have to stay firmly apart, and those 10-meter buffers must never, ever overlap. All right, part 5,
Let's talk about emissions and exclusions.
Version 1.1 introduces this brilliant 5% rule that acts as a massive time saver. It really takes the guesswork right out of your emissions accounting. Step 1. Just divide all your potential emission sources, like, say, fertilizer use, by your total expected carbon removals. Is it less than 5%? Great. Ignore it entirely. Greater than 5%? Okay. Rank those sources from largest to smallest, sum them up until you hit 95% of your total emissions, and then just account for those. It's a really clean, highly pragmatic formula.
To protect native ecosystems, the rules on exclusions are ironclad, as they should be. You absolutely cannot initiate a project on lands that were managed for timber harvest in the past 10 years, and you definitely cannot clear native or primary forests just to plant new trees. Now, you are allowed to clear deadwood to reduce fire risk, but if you go that route, you have to calculate and account for those emissions using plot data taken before the clearing happened.
And finally, Part 6, Agroforestry Guidelines.
This is a highly requested update and a real game changer for agroforestry developers, the integration of spot planting. This basically means you aren't forced to create a neat, perfectly spaced grid of timber anymore. You can intentionally plant trees in targeted spots to act as a catalyst. These trees spark broader natural regeneration across a much wider landscape by boosting seedling availability. It's fantastic.
So, you might be wondering, what if you plant fewer than 50 trees per hectare, but your goal is that broader ecological shift? Well, here is the ultimate agroforestry hack. Even with minimal trees planted, if your goal is natural regeneration, you actually should use the area-based approach. This lets you claim credits for all the carbon generated across the entire landscape, not just the few catalyst trees you originally put in the ground. It completely shifts the math for large-scale ecological restoration.
So there we have it. You now have a clear roadmap. You've got exact density thresholds, robust remote sensing baselines, and a massive opportunity to leverage spot planting in your agroforestry projects. The toolkit for high-integrity carbon removal is honestly stronger than ever right now. So the only question remaining is, how quickly are you going to adapt your next nature-based removal strategy to capture all the landscape-level value of version 1.1? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy project developing.